Have you ever had a friend or family member ask to borrow things such as your clothes, your shoes, your car, or maybe even money? And did you end up saying yes, even though you really wanted to say no? Or did you make up an excuse so that you didn't have to say no? I thought saying no made me a bad person. And so I would always find ways to avoid confrontation. This was something we talked about in my last video that relates to people pleasing and how harmful it can be. It's most likely because you've never learned how to set boundaries. And that's okay, because like many of you, I didn't learn this until recently. It's something I'm still working on, but I figured this is something we can learn together. Let's go. You just looking. You looking at the camera? Let's start with asking, what is a boundary? A boundary is a defined limit or rule that we set with other people. It determines the behavior we accept from others and what others can expect from us. This is something a lot of us have a hard time grasping because we simply weren't taught this, not in school, and it was dependent on our parents. It's even harder for Asians to understand because boundaries do not exist in our household. This is my hot take on our Asian upbringing. Asian parents tend to be controlling because they can't trust us, or perhaps they feel entitled to our life after giving up theirs. Especially immigrant parents who left their home to build a better life for us. It's one of the most selfless acts you can give to your children, but to expect something in return makes it a conditional relationship. A conditional relationship means we receive love and affection as long as we meet certain expectations, such as being the top student in the class or having a career that makes a lot of money. It's unfortunate that many of us experience conditional relationship with our parents, but hey, we can't change the past. All we can do now is build a healthier lifestyle by caring for our emotional, mental, and physical well-being. That starts with learning about boundaries. So let's learn why boundaries are important and the difference between healthy and unhealthy boundaries. Okay, we're gonna try something a little bit visual and different. I'm gonna use my iPad to draw and illustrate about boundaries. There's this great analogy of the garden fence from psychologist Dr. Sarah Davis that demonstrates what boundaries look like. Imagine you have a garden. You have this pretty garden and there's a fence around it. The fence lets people know what area is yours. Imagine there is a person right behind that fence. So the fence is low enough to see over and talk to others, yet tall enough that you feel safe and secure. There's also a gate right here for you to let people in and out of your garden. This analogy shows what healthy boundaries look like. It's clear and firm without being rigid because it's accessible to people. On the other hand, you could have a garden with no fence at all. So I'm gonna take away this fence. This can go away. And without a fence, people don't know what area belongs to you. And so they might step all over your grass. There could be some dog poop on there because people walk their dog. They could even park their car on your garden. And without boundaries, nobody knows where they stand. There are no guidelines or rules, and we're left feeling upset or resentful. This demonstrates loose or having no boundaries. Okay, but what if we built a really, really tall wall around your garden? That means nobody can see over it. You're basically telling others to stay away from your garden. And this is an example of rigid boundaries. People with rigid boundaries tend to fear others. They struggle with asking others for help, and they have a hard time being emotional intimate. This is just as unhealthy as having no boundaries. Okay, I hope that was helpful to illustrate, and this was kind of fun to do together, but let's kind of recap the different forms of boundaries. Let's start with the loose boundaries where we don't have any sort of fence. If you have loose or no boundaries, You have a hard time saying no. You share too much about yourself. You always try to fix or help others. You care too much about what other people think, so you'll make decisions based off of that. You let other people boss you around. You struggle to communicate with what you need or what you want. And you are afraid that people won't like you if you say no. These are examples of having loose or no boundaries. Now, with this one, remember, if you have rigid boundaries, you have very strict rules. You keep your personal stuff very private. You find it hard to ask for help. You stay away from close friendships. You might seem distant or do not show feelings towards people, and you try to control others to avoid being rejected. And if we go back to this beautiful white picket fence with the gate, this is an example of healthy boundaries. You know your values, your thoughts, and beliefs. You stick to your beliefs and you don't compromise. You understand what your responsibilities are and what isn't your responsibility. You speak up for yourself in a balanced and considerate way. You can change your mind without losing your sense of self. You share things about yourself in the right amount, sharing too much and you're not sharing too little. You accept when others tell you no as a form of respecting their boundaries. Oh, by the way, it's common that we have a mix of boundaries depending on the situation. So you might have strict boundaries at work where you feel like you have to have your guard up in comparison to having loose boundaries at home with your family or friends. How do we set our boundaries? I will tell you, it's not as easy as setting it and they'll magically work. That's not how it goes. It is a behavior we'll have to practice continuously throughout our life. Being able to will allow you to live a more happier, content, meaningful life where you feel comfortable and safe, because at the end of the day, that is the most important aspect. So the biggest step you can take in understanding what your boundaries are is getting to know yourself. And I know this might sound redundant, cliche, or maybe you've been avoiding it for a very long time, like I have. You really need to sit down and reflect. Reflect on your feelings, pay attention to what makes you feel happy, stressed, or uncomfortable. And you also need to understand what you value. Think about what's really important to you, like honesty, respect, or personal space. Listen to your emotions. Notice your reactions. When something makes you feel upset or uneasy, your instincts can help signal what isn't right for you. Set clear limits. So deciding what's okay and what's not okay. Think about behaviors, actions, or words that are acceptable to you and what isn't. Be specific. The more specific you are, the easier it is for people to understand. For instance, hey, I feel uncomfortable when you touch my food without asking. That doesn't sound bad at all, right? Set priorities. Consider your personal and professional priorities as well as the priorities of others. Maybe you prioritize your family before your friends. Whatever that order is, that's up to you to decide. You have a lot of free will, and as long as you practice using it and choosing to use it, then you honestly will live a much more healthier life. How do we go outside into the world and ensure that our boundaries are being respected? The first is to communicate clearly. So what helps is to use I statements. When you explain your boundaries, use phrases like I feel or I need to express yourself. We go back to the beginning. And if you don't feel comfortable about someone borrowing your stuff, you could say, I'm sorry, but I don't feel comfortable lending my things. And usually people would respect that. It helps to communicate your boundaries early into the relationship. So you're kind of setting that expectation and people will know not to cross it in the future. But when you already have a long relationship with someone where your boundaries have been crossed, it's a little hard to navigate that. I think if anyone's mature and respectful towards you, then they will understand and listen. It helps to practice assertiveness. So be clear and direct without being aggressive or passive. I think I have a hard time being assertive because I'm so passive, but I'm pretty aggressive with my parents. So that's a different story. I think I'm just passive with strangers. Practice saying no. I've noticed that the more you practice saying no, the easier it actually gets. Once you set a boundary, try to keep it. This helps people understand that you're serious about it. If you feel like your boundaries have changed, it is totally okay to revisit that boundary and adjust accordingly. So say maybe in the beginning you weren't comfortable with someone physically touching you in any way, but then later as you became close to this person, maybe you're okay and you can express that. We are people and we grow and evolve, we change, and it's perfectly normal that that happens. Lastly, respect other people's boundaries. If you're expecting people to respect your boundaries, then you have to respect other people's as well. If they can't respect your boundaries, you really need to reconsider your relationship with that person. Maybe you guys have differences, and that's perfectly okay. When that happens, you just kind of have to let people out of your life. I hope that clears up what are boundaries, the different forms of boundaries. There are different types. It's a lot, so we're going to cover that in another video. But for now, what I want you to take away from this is the understanding of why boundaries are important and why you want to build a continuous relationship with yourself. The biggest first step you can take is just getting to know yourself and understanding what you value, what your needs are, what are your desires. And the more you understand that you have a clearer picture of who you are, the easier it gets to even like setting intentions and making steps towards your own goals in life. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you guys at the next one. Bye.